Hello, everyone. Welcome to this introduction to Globus Flows that will be presented in two parts, starting with part one. My name is Ada Nicolaitis. I'm a software engineering manager at Globus working on the Automate team. The Automate team supports a number of different products kind of in this space, including Globus Flows, Globus Timers, Globus Search, the Globus Python SDK, and the Globus CLI. So we have kind of a number of things, and we'll touch on some topics later on, particularly in part two, about how some of these are particularly used together in many cases. But today we are going to be focusing on Globus Flows. So this section, part one, is really going to be focusing on an intro to flows, what it is, talking about some of the key concepts and talking about how to use flows. And in particularly, getting started with flows, one of the things that's most important is to start with a really good grounding in some of the terminology in terms of some of the basic ideas that provide the building blocks to use flows and to understand what they're doing. And then we'll build on that knowledge in part two to actually dig into some of the internals and understand more of the mechanics of it. So I want to make sure to call out that if you want to dive deeper into this topic, we will do some Q&A at the end. And as well as that, there will be part two following this. And there is documentation available at the Globus doc site. I will probably refer to this one or two times during the course of this presentation, just so you can see where to find things in some of the resources that are going to be available to you through that site as you continue on your flows journey. So this is the flows page inside of this site, and we'll see a little bit more of that later. All right, so for starters, we're all here. What is Flows? Flows is fundamentally a service for creating and managing hosted automations that we call flows. We think of this as a platform for managed, secure, reliable task orchestration. And in particular, one of the things that it allows you to do, kind of the fundamental piece of this, is it allows you to create, share, and run those flows, so those hosted automations. You can delegate permissions to other Globus users on your flows, and so potentially allow them to, say, view your flow, to start your flow running, and even to administer your flow. So give them permission to make edits to it or to give permissions to other users. So then if flows is about creating and sharing flows, what is a flow? A flow fundamentally is a sequence of steps. And so you can kind of think of this as proceeding through a number of different steps that are going to occur, that are going to allow you to do different things and connect them together in a sequence. And we're going to dive a bit more into the types of things you can do, but know that this is, it allows you to do decision logic and allows you to interact with other services in complex ways. So it has a number of really important characteristics to it. First is that it is hosted. So this runs on the Globus platform, and it is accessible through a bunch of different interfaces, including the web app, including the Globus CLI, including the Globus Python SDK, and it also exposes an API, so a RESTful API if you want to interact with it in some other manner. It is also reusable. So a flow can be run multiple times with either the same input or with different input. So allowing it to be repeated over and over again and possibly to perform different variations of actions each time it runs. It's also flexible. It can store and manipulate state, like variables. And it can also contain its own decision logic, doing things like branching and looping in the course of its run. It is also, as I mentioned before, shareable. And in particular, you can even present a customizable interface in the Globus web app. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, and we'll actually see an example of it. And that can be shared with other users and groups in order to delegate access to these applications. So in short, you can think of a flow as a hosted application on the Globus platform. Each time you use the flow, it is going to operate over a series of steps in a specified order, which allows for automation of complex interactions across multiple services. So, okay, we've got some idea of what a flow is, but how do you use it? Well, each time a flow is executed, we call this a run. You can start new runs from the web app, from the CLI, from the Python SDK, and from the API. You'll hear that same set of things, but effectively almost all of our interfaces and support interacting with flows and launching flows. Each run is going to accept input from the user that starts the flow, and then we'll perform a series of actions using that input in response. You also have the ability to manage the run. So each time you initiate it, that run can be managed, and you can track its detailed progress through something called the event log. And so seeing how the state is transformed as it progresses through and what the result of different actions were as you passed through it. And you're also able to share access to that run. So in addition to being able to share access to the flow, you as the owner of your run can delegate access to other people and allow them to view it and monitor its progress. So we mentioned that idea then, if a flow is made up of actions, what is an action? Well, an action is a special type of state. And in particular, then we have to ask, what is a state? And a state comes to us from AWS step functions, which defines a thing called the states language. And so flows builds upon and extends in a number of really interesting ways this states language, and allowing you to create interesting interactions between different services. From states language, there are some basic things that are included out of the box. So for anyone that has any familiarity with it, you might be familiarity with things like the wait state, which allows you to wait for a period of time before proceeding, or the choice state, which allows you to incorporate branching logic based on the value of particular pieces of your data in the state, or even the pass state, which allows you to potentially reshape your data in certain ways. Okay, if those are states, what is an action still? Well, the action is kind of the heart of flows, and these are operations that you can perform on other resources and services. So this is an extension of those states. An action is a particular type of state. Importantly, these are managed interactions. And what does that mean? Well, it means that these interactions are hosted. And so they're being performed by the service. They can handle authentication. They can validate input at each step. They can manage interactions with other services. They can store that state. They can retry when needed. And they can even request additional permissions. And we'll take a little bit of a look at what that in particular looks like when we get to part 2 and talk about inactive runs. But for now, know that you're kind of getting a bundle of this functionality with each of these actions, and that this is included as part of operating a run and interacting with each service in the course of it. So authenticate, authorize, validate, store, auto retry. What are some examples of some actions then? What are the types of things you can do in the course of running a flow? Well, Globus provides many actions out of the box, but we can give you some examples of things that are already included and available for you to use today. You can start a new transfer. You can delete files and folders in a collection. You can create new directories. You can list items in a directory on a collection. We've got a stat action. So if you want to get particular information about a folder or file in a collection, you can do that. You can create a digital object identifier by minting it with DataSite. You can ingest data into Globus Search. You can delete data in Globus Search. You can send a notification via email, which sometimes can be useful to let users know about kind of the progress of things or to notify them if particular circumstances have come up. You can wait for user input. And in particular, this allows you to expose a form via the web that allows a user to control access to that might imply different steps in the flow or different paths for it to take and make decisions manually. You can set permissions on particular files and folders. You can execute a function with Globus Compute, and you can even create a guest collection with GCS. So a number of different things that you can do there. And as you can probably, hopefully start to imagine, you can compose these to turn into some really rich functionality. So what types of things can you build with it? One thing to know is we use these ourselves, actually. And so we have used flows as an organization in some cases to respond to user requests and user feedback and to extend or build on top of our existing services. In general, we call these Globus-provided flows, and we'll take a look in a little bit when we look at the web app of how you find Globus-provided flows and how you can use those. But those are available and free for you to use without even needing to create a new flow of your own. So types of flows that we offer through there. One is the two-stage transfer. The two-stage transfer is effectively allows you to temporarily transfer to an intermediate location before transferring to the actual final destination. This is kind of an interesting case that helps to accelerate certain types of transfers by moving them through an intermediary, where you might be able to have a fast connection from the source to the intermediary and from the intermediary to the destination, but in fact you don't from the source to the destination directly. And so it can be kind of a helpful utility function that can clean up along the way and facilitate these types of moves as a end-to-end automation. Another type of Globus-provided flow that we offer is move. So copying and deleting. Oftentimes, folks want to not just transfer files, but they want to clean up the source when the transfer completes. So the move flow enables that to happen and can actually wait for the transfer to finish and then go back and remove those source files that were targeted by the original transfer. Additionally, we have a newer offering in the Globus-provided flows called transfer and set permissions. And transfer and set permissions will allow you, after transferring to a particular destination, to then share those files on that destination with specific users and groups. So we are continuing to add more Globus-provided flows, which allow you to use flows out of the box without even starting to author your own flows. And this gives you an idea of how you can kind of compose some of these actions into richer, more complex functionality. So at this point, it's probably good for us to get a little bit of time hands-on and start diving into what it actually looks like to run a flow. And for that, I'm going to hop over to the web app. Now, remember, as we mentioned before, the web app is just one of the interfaces, but it's a pretty great interface for interacting with flows. But you do also have the Globus CLI available. You do also have the Globus Python SDK. You can interact via the API. So you do have a number of different options here. But this is the web app. And in the web app, you will see I have come here into the flows section. So when you open up the flows section, the first thing you are going to see is this runs page that has a list of all of the runs that you have done recently. And you can dive into here and get additional information. But so we're going to take kind of a look through each of these things. You have this runs tab at the top. We also have this library tab. And the library is a list of all of the flows that you have access to. And so in this case, you can see I've highlighted Globus-provided flow. And so this is going to show us flows that come from Globus. And you'll notice these are indicated with the Globus icon so that you know that they are from us. So we'll take a look at those in a little bit. You also have the ability here to deploy a flow using the web app. We will not look in as much detail at this, but you do have options to both do this from the CLI, do this from the web app, and also do this from something called the Flows IDE, which is a new beta offering from us that gives you some advanced ability to visualize what the potential paths are through your flow. And we'll take a peek at that at part 2. For now, taking a look at the library, we have a number of different things that we can do in here. So in addition to looking at the Globus-provided flow, you can also narrow things down to say flows that you are an administrator on. You can find flows that you are a runner on. And so these are kind of filtering by different types of permissions. And as well as that, there's also a search field that allows you to search for particular fields. And so if I wanted to find this 2-stage transfer, I can dive in here and then I will see a list of things that potentially match that. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of these Globus-provided flows, as we mentioned, kind of looking for that logo. And we're going to dive into the move flow. And so when you come in here, you're going to see an overview page that has a bunch of different metadata about what the flow is. These are generally provided for the most part by the author of the flow. And so this includes the flow's title, a subtitle with some more, additional information, sometimes a lengthy description letting you know what the flow will do, a number of keywords that can kind of help for searching through that flow. Information about the owners, if it's managed under a subscription, the number of steps, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that you can see in here, as long as you have sufficient access, generally you have to be an owner or admin on the flow to see this, so you can also access the definition. And so from within here, you can see all of the different steps. This is a particularly complex flow, so don't get intimidated, but you can see all of the different steps that are potentially going to run in here, as well as getting the input schema. And the input schema we'll talk about again a bit later as we talk about the parts of a flow. But we also give you tools to allow you to copy the flow definition to your clipboard to use it in other places, as well as downloading a copy of it. And in addition to that, we also have the roles page, and the roles page allows you to control who has access to your flow. And so we mentioned these ideas of you've got owners, you've got administrators, you've got people who are allowed to run it. You can also add people who are just allowed to view it but not run it. There's more information about the different types of roles that you can grant in it in the documentation. So coming back to the overview, one of the things that we can do from here, give me just a sec. There we go, is we can see runs for this flow. These are runs that you have access to. We can, if you're an admin, you can edit it, but in particular, you can start it from here. And so one of the things you'll notice is that it is going to look and ask for additional permission that it might need in order to run this flow. And so the first permission that it knows that it needs, and sometimes the only permission in many cases, is to start and manage runs of this flow. And so this is the web app asking me to give the web app permission to start this flow on my behalf. So I'm going to go ahead and say allow. You can dive in and get more information about the types of access that the flow itself will need in order to do this. All right. So hopping back in here, we are now good to go. And so you will see that the guided input gives you a nice form that you can use to provide what the flow needs in order to run. And so in this case, the move flow requires just a couple things. You can see there's a required field, the source, and a required field for the destination. In this case, because I have this nice interface, I can actually browse for this. And so I need to specify a collection first. So let's go ahead and see if we can get the Globus tutorial collection. I'm going to pull that up. I'll hit browse. I will give it permission to access this. And so this is just to allow the web app to get access to the tutorial collection. And now we can see that we've got files that we can browse to. I'll go ahead and I'll just transfer this file 1. And then next up, we will go to, let's do tutorial 2. I'll allow it to access that. And I'll have it add it to my home directory in here. We can go ahead and point it there. Great. And then generally speaking, you're going to want to label your transfer tasks. We will generate one automatically for you if needed, if you don't provide it. But in this case, we'll say this is my test run. You can also, oh, sorry, these are actually for the transfer tasks. This is for the run. And so then you can label the individual transfer operations as well that are going to happen here. You can see these are optional. And you can also potentially add tags to the run, which can sometimes help in making things kind of filterable and sortable. If you build up lots of runs, this can be kind of an easy way to file and categorize them. And so at this point, I can start the run. Now I know I've done a thing that is probably not going to be valid, but we'll go ahead and let this happen. Then we can hop over and you can see from here the run was successfully started. So the input I gave it was valid. And we can even go in and view run details. We can see that the run is proceeding at this point. We also have access now to the event log. And so the event log is going to show you the process of this run executing and proceeding through each of its steps. And this will kind of update automatically as it goes through each of these steps and completes its operation. This is ultimately where you go to understand the inner workings of what happened during your run. And in particular, this is really, really key for troubleshooting. And so as you're building and authoring flows, sometimes this can be useful to understand what state your run was in or what state the flow thought that it had at a particular time as you're building it out. And it also allows you to monitor the execution of this live in real time, so you can kind of see how things are proceeding, which can be particularly helpful for long-lived runs. Some runs can be quite short and, a matter of even less than a minute in some cases. And other runs can run for many, many days. And so we have a number of users who use flows to operate and monitor very long-lived processes. And so this becomes a kind of a helpful place to check in and see how that is progressing. You can also from here share the run using those roles. And so this assigns a new role on the run itself. So rather than granting access to the flow, this allows you to give access to see details about the run and how it progressed. And in addition to that, one of the things that we include in the run is a snapshot of the definition at the time that you ran it. And often that snapshot is really useful in conjunction with the event log, because here you see each of these different states that it is moving through for each of these actions. And in here, you can then refer back to the definition and look up what that action was and what it was supposed to be doing. And so again, this can be a helpful reference, especially if a flow might have changed over time and you want to see what the flow looked like at that particular time. So a bunch of handy tools in here that allow you to work with your flows.